They said, "Stay in the lounge, Mom. We'll come back for you after check-in." And I nodded. Of course I did. That's what you do when your son gives you an instruction with that polite, clipped voice. The one he saves for servers, telemarketers, and inconvenient old women who still happen to be his mother. So I stayed. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. They sat me next to a dusty ficus plant, wedged between a crying toddler and a flickering television tuned to weather updates. It was 9:15 the morning. I remember because I'd looked at my watch so many times the numbers stopped meaning anything. I waited. I'd packed 3 days before, laid out my clothes on the bed just like I used to do for Ryan's school field trips. Stephanie, my daughter-in-law, had insisted on matching shirts for the whole family. Mine was pink. "Vacation Nana," in thick vinyl letters. I didn't like it, but I wore it anyway. Because that's what you do when you're trying to keep the peace. She'd rolled her eyes when I brought my own snacks. Made a joke at security about me holding up the line with my grandma trail mix. Ryan didn't say anything. He rarely did when Stephanie made her jokes. And that morning, he'd been quiet. Too quiet. The tension showed up slowly. Stephanie kept checking her phone. Ryan kept staring straight ahead. The kids were too buried in their screens to notice. But I noticed. That's the thing about getting older. People think you stop paying attention, but you see more. You just speak less. At the TSA line, Stephanie brushed my shoulder and said, "We'll sort the seats later." That was the last time she looked me in the eye. After security, she turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Why don't you wait in the lounge, Helen? We'll check the bags, get the kids settled, and come back for you. Just relax. You've done enough." She patted my hand. It wasn't affection. It was dismissal. So I sat, and I waited. I watched them disappear into the crowd. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 4. I asked the front desk to page Ryan. Nothing. By the 5th hour, I stopped looking toward the entrance. The woman across from me had lunch, made 2 phone calls, and left. A family of 5 with matching backpacks came and went. Flights were called, delayed, departed. I stayed. At 5 o'clock, I walked to the counter and gave the clerk Ryan's full name. She typed something, hesitated, and then looked at me carefully. "They checked into the 1:45 flight to Honolulu, ma'am. It's already departed." I nodded, the way you do when you hear something final. Then I asked her to say it again. She did, slower this time, with a voice full of pity. I remember the kindness. It was the only kindness I'd been shown that day. So that was that. They left. Not by accident. Not by oversight. Ryan isn't careless. And Stephanie? She never does anything without intention. I walked to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and sat not to cry, but to breathe. I didn't have the tears. I didn't even have the energy for anger. I just needed a place where no one would ask if I was okay. When I came out, the airport had changed. It always does around evening. The rush dims. The noise softens. You start to see people again instead of just motion. I walked toward the big departure board. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just stared at the list like I was choosing something off a diner menu. Then I saw it. Portland. A 7:35 p.m. I don't know why I chose Portland. Maybe because it was far. Maybe because I hadn't been there in decades. Maybe because once, long ago, it had been mine. I walked up to the counter. "1 ticket to Portland," I said. The woman behind the counter looked up. "Round trip?" "Number 1 way." I used my own card. The one Ryan didn't know about. The one I'd kept since before his wedding, tucked away for just in case. I had enough for the flight. A motel maybe? A start? I turned off my phone. There were no messages. No missed calls. Of course not. At the gate, no one asked why I was alone. No one noticed the absence of a pink Vacation Nana shirt I'd thrown it away before boarding. In the trash. Not folded, not tucked. Just gone. On the plane, I watched the lights of Charlotte disappear beneath us. 8 hours ago, I thought I was going to paradise. Turns out I was being left behind. But now I was going somewhere real. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The plane landed just after 10 p.m. Portland's airport was quieter than I remembered. It felt smaller somehow, though maybe it was me who had shrunk over the years, folded in on myself, after a day like no other. I didn't rush through the terminal. Not because of age, but because there was no reason to hurry anymore. No one was waiting. No clipboard holding greeter. No grandchildren with signs. No family looking vaguely inconvenienced. Just me. And for once, that felt less like loneliness and more like freedom. Outside, the air was crisp and wet. It had rained recently. The pavement smelled like pine and old concrete, like the kind of evening where something might begin. I found a bench under the awning, set down my old carry-on brown leather, worn smooth at the corners, and sat quietly, letting the cold settle into my bones. The bag was the one Derek gave me for our 25th anniversary. He'd always said I packed like we were moving across the country instead of just going to Myrtle Beach. He would have laughed at what happened today. A deep, dry laugh that meant, "Well, sweetheart, what did you expect?" I didn't expect this, but I wasn't surprised either. I opened my wallet. 2 cards, 1 ID, $76 in cash, and a folded piece of paper I'd kept tucked behind my insurance card for nearly 50 years. 1849, Quinn Street. My first apartment after Derek and I married. I had written it down again before the trip, not for any reason. Not that I thought I'd need it, but something about seeing the address in my own handwriting made me feel like there was a version of me still connected to a beginning. I called a cab. The driver was quiet. A blessing. I gave him the address of a cheap motel I'd found on my phone a few days earlier, back when Stephanie was still planning the family's itinerary and I was still pretending to be included. The motel was tucked behind a diner and a tire shop, just past a blinking yellow traffic light. Room 207. The hallway smelled like cleaning fluid and something older, something tired. The key stuck in the lock, but the room was clean. 1 bed, 1 chair, 1 window. I lay down fully dressed, blanket scratchy against my arms, and closed my eyes. No tears, just sleep. Heavy and dreamless. In the morning, I woke before the sun. It was automatic. Decades of preparing school lunches and checking backpacks before dawn had conditioned my body to rise early whether it was wanted or not. I made the motel coffee burnt, thin, but warm, and sat in the stiff-backed chair by the window, watching the world wake up. A woman in a pink robe walked her dog past the parking lot. She looked about my age, maybe a little straighter in the back. I wondered if she knew what it meant to be left behind, or if she'd simply chosen herself long ago. At 9, I checked out of the motel and started walking. My hip complained, but I didn't stop. 3 blocks down, I found a bakery with a hand-painted sign and the smell of cinnamon pushing through the seams of the door. I went in. The counter woman was younger, with short hair and a tired kindness behind her eyes. I bought a scone, handed her exact change. "You're not from around here," she said with a smile. "I used to be," I said. "A long time ago." "Well," she replied. "Welcome back." There was a bulletin board near the door housing listings, part-time jobs, missing cats. One note stood out. Room for rent. Quiet lady preferred. Private room, shared kitchen. No drama, no nonsense. $400, month. Call Joyce. Oh, blocky handwriting. No frills. The kind of woman who meant every word she wrote. I took a photo of the number. By noon, I was sitting on a park bench in a patch of sunlight, the scone long gone and my feet already sore. I called. The phone rang 3 times before a raspy voice answered. "Yes. I'm calling about the room for rent." Long pause. "How old are you?" 77. "Are you clean?" "Yes." "No boyfriends, right?" I chuckled. "Not in a long time." Well," she said. "Come by at 4. 2185 East Stafford. Bring cash for the first week." She hung up. I wrote the address on a napkin. At 3:55, I stood in front of a faded blue house with peeling porch railings and a wind chime that sounded like someone tapping spoons together. A cat sat curled on the front step like a sentry. When I knocked, the door opened with a soft creak. "You're the old lady?" the woman asked. cigarette in one hand, gray hair clipped back in a bun that had seen better mornings. I suppose I am. She stepped aside. Come in then. Let's see if we can tolerate each other. The house smelled like lavender and fried onions. Not unpleasant, just lived in. Like someone who cooked real meals and didn't fuss over the occasional grease stain. The entryway was narrow, lined with stacked books and folded newspapers. I followed her through to a sitting room with a muted television and a crocheted blanket on the couch. The room's upstairs, she said, gesturing with her cigarette. I climbed slowly, one hand on the banister. The upstairs hallway was dim, paint chipped at the corners. She opened the last door on the left. This is it. The room was small. A twin bed, a dresser, a narrow desk beneath a wide window. Sunlight pooled on the worn wood floor like it had been waiting for me. It's fine, I said. $400 a month, she replied. But I take it weekly. $100 a week. Cash. No checks. No credit. No sob stories. She looked me over. You don't seem like the sob story type. Not anymore, I said. She nodded like that was the right answer. Kitchens shared. Bathrooms down the hall. No guests without warning. I like quiet. You cause trouble, you're out. We clear? Crystal. She handed me a key. You can stay tonight if you've got the first week's rent. Oh. I took the envelope from my coat pocket, 5/20s. I handed it to her. She didn't count it, just folded the bills and tucked them into her shirt pocket. You hungry? I could eat. She made grilled cheese sandwiches and poured tomato soup into mismatched bowls. We ate at the tiny kitchen table beneath a yellowed ceiling fan that ticked like a clock. She didn't ask questions. That was the gift. People always ask too soon, before you're ready to say it out loud. She only said, I hate eating alone. I nodded. So do I. That night, I unpacked slowly. 3 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, my toothbrush, medication, and a paperback novel I'd started and never finished. I placed each item in the dresser as if it mattered. Maybe it did. The walls creaked. Somewhere downstairs, I heard Ruth talking softly to the cat. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. They were the sounds of a life lived simply, honestly. I slept well. In the morning, I brewed coffee before Ruth came downstairs. It felt strange, but good to make coffee for no one but myself. To stand in a kitchen that didn't belong to people who only remembered you when they needed something. By the 3rd day, I found a routine. I walked the neighborhood, learned the side streets, found a tiny corner cafe with a help wanted sign in the window. I walked in, asked if they were still hiring. The young woman behind the counter looked up from wiping tables and blinked at me. You want to apply? Yes. She called someone from the back. A stocky woman with a name tag that read Heather emerged, squinting. You have experience? I raised 3 kids and ran a household for 50 years. I can make coffee, carry plates, and I don't call in sick. She stared at me, then shrugged. Trial shift tomorrow. 6 to 11. Make it through that, we'll talk. Oh, that night, I stood in front of the small mirror in my room. I ironed the only blouse I had that still held a crease, looked myself in the eye. I wasn't scared, just ready. It had been less than a week since the airport, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. I arrived 15 minutes early. The cafe sat on the corner of a quiet intersection, wedged between a laundromat and a locksmith that didn't open until noon. It wasn't a fancy place, 3 booths, a counter with cracked red stools, and the kind of smell that lived in the walls, burnt toast, old coffee, something fried and permanent. I stood outside a moment, breathing in the sharp Portland morning damp with possibility. The sky was that soft gray that hinted at rain but never committed. I liked it. It reminded me of the kind of days when I used to pack Ryan's lunch and listen to the birds outside the kitchen window. A man with thick glasses and an apron stained with flour unlocked the door without a word. He nodded once and went straight into the kitchen. A grunt. That was all. Heather arrived a few minutes later, holding a travel mug and a ring of keys on a rainbow lanyard. Right on time, she said. She didn't smile, but she didn't scowl either. Progress. She handed me an apron. Keep your hair tied back. No perfume. Refill coffee without being asked. And if someone leaves a lousy tip, That's on you, not them. I tied the apron around my waist. Understood. She paused and looked at me, squinting. You nervous? No, I said. I'm 77. I've buried a husband, raised a son who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, and survived 5 colonoscopies. This is just coffee. That made her snort. Fair enough. Unquote. By 7, the first wave rolled in construction workers. Nurses coming off the night shift, early risers in worn flannel and stiff hands. The regulars, I moved slow but steady, carried plates without wobble, poured coffee like it mattered, smiled when it felt natural, remembered orders without writing them down. By 9, I found a rhythm. It was like riding a bike, if the bike had sticky floors and a temperamental coffee pot. Where'd they dig you up? A man asked kindly, sliding a $5 tip beneath his saucer. Same place they find everything worth keeping, I said. Back shelf under a blanket. He laughed. Heather saw. She didn't say much. But after the breakfast rush died down, she handed me a clean towel. You'll do. We finished at 11. My feet ached, but my head was clearer than it had been in months, maybe years. Heather poured herself another cup and pointed to the stool next to hers at the counter. Sit. I did. You did fine. Just fine? You'll get better. She sipped. Minimum wage plus tips. No benefits, but steady hours. I'll give you all the weekday mornings. That enough for you? It's more than enough. We sat in silence for a moment. You got kids? I did, I said, quietly. She looked sideways at me, waiting. They're traveling, I added. She nodded. They always are. End quote. I walked back to Ruth's house slower than before. My apron was folded in my tote bag, my back stiff but satisfied. The air smelled like fir trees and exhaust very Portland. Ruth was in the front yard, pulling weeds in a t-shirt that read, Don't talk to me before coffee. You get the job? She called without looking up. I did. Told you they need people who show up. That night, we ate frozen pot pies and watched the news with the sound off. Franklin Ruth's cat climbed into my lap and purred like he'd known me forever. You staying long? Ruth asked during a commercial. I don't know yet. You can, as long as you pay rent and don't hog the remote. I don't even like the remote, I said. She smiled and passed me the last cookie. Later that night, I held my phone, still turned off. I didn't check it. Didn't want to. I picked up the old paperback I'd brought from Charlotte, the one I'd started reading years ago and never finished. I turned to the first page and began again. The light from the desk lamp was soft and steady. It was enough. Andersome. The next morning, I arrived early again. I always did. Some habits are hard to unlearn, especially the good ones. Heather was already there, humming tunelessly as she loaded sugar packets. At 9:10 a.m., a man walked in. He wore a gray windbreaker, a cap tucked under one arm, and moved like he was a little too proud to use a cane, though I could tell he probably needed one. He sat at the counter, scanned the menu like it was written in Latin, and then looked up at me. You the one who knows how to make real coffee? He asked. I try. Then I'll take one. Just cream. 2 splashes. I poured it without asking his name. Some people introduce themselves later. Some don't. That's okay. He drank slowly, folded the newspaper someone had left behind. Didn't say much, but he came back the next day. And the next? By Thursday, I learned his name. Walter Green, widower. 2 sons, one in Boston, one in Arizona. We didn't talk about them much. Mostly we talked about birds. He liked cardinals. I liked finches. We both agreed crows were smarter than people gave them credit for. On Friday, he brought in a picture of his wife, a small black and white photo in a cracked leather wallet. He said they were married 46 years. She made better coffee than this, he added. But you come close. I smiled and refilled his cup. He lingered a little longer that day. I didn't mind. There was something about the way he folded his napkin carefully, the way he looked out the window before speaking, the way he didn't ask questions he wouldn't answer himself. That evening, I stood at the window of my room. The sun had dipped below the rooftops. The air smelled like pine needles and sidewalk dust. I thought of Walter's hands wrapped around his cup, Of Ruth's crooked smile when she handed me that last cookie. Of Heather saving me the crossword from the morning paper. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And after a lifetime of being useful to others, being necessary to someone else's agenda, that quiet sense of ownership of place, of rhythm, of ordinary routine felt like treasure. I still hadn't turned on my phone. I wasn't ready, but I'd started something. Something that didn't need anyone's permission but my own. It was late Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet hour where sunlight turns golden and everything in the house feels still like it's listening. I had just finished sweeping the porch. There were a few early leaves falling already, stubborn reminders that even in spring, the seasons never wait for permission to change. That's when I heard it. The soft knock. 3 taps. Polite. Tentative. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door, half expecting Ruth with one of her surprise casserole experiments. But it wasn't Ruth. It was Jacob. Not in the flesh. Just his words, tucked inside a plain white envelope with no return address. The kind that makes your heart race for no good reason. Ruth stood behind me, holding the rest of the mail. "Something for you," she said, handing it over like it might break. The handwriting stopped me cold. Looping, nervous, tilted slightly to the right. Jacob. My Jacob. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear anything, not the paper, not the feeling. Inside, 1 sheet of lined notebook paper, folded twice. "Grandma, where are you?" That was the first line. Just 3 words. But they carried more weight than all the voicemails in the world. "Dad and Stephanie are freaking out. They said you disappeared. I've been checking your number every day. No word, no post, nothing. I miss you. Please let me know you're okay." There was a phone number scribbled at the bottom. A new one. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat with the letter in my lap for a long while. The paper warm from my hands, softening at the creases. Ruth didn't ask. She just poured me a cup of tea and slid it across the table like an offering. I didn't call Jacob. Not that day. But something inside me shifted. A corner unfolded. A thread tugged loose. I had been building something here, a routine, a rhythm, a small but sturdy place to stand. But that letter reminded me that not everything I left behind had been broken. Some parts were still reaching. Oh. The next day at the cafe, Heather slid a crossword toward me without a word. It was folded neatly, torn from the morning paper. The gesture meant more than I could say. "Thanks," I said. "You look like someone who finishes what they start." I smiled. At 9:10 sharp, Walter walked in. He hung his cane on the back of his usual stool and gave me a look that asked without asking. "You ever think about going back?" he asked that morning between sips. "To Wilmington?" "To any of it." I wiped the counter slowly. "Number not once." He nodded, folding his napkin precisely. "Then maybe you finally arrived." I thought about that later. As I walked home, Jacob's letter tucked safely in my purse. I hadn't arrived. Not fully. But I was here. I was choosing. And that counted for something. Ruth was in the backyard, tending her tomato plants with the same intensity she gave to politics and crossword puzzles. "You get any news?" she asked without looking up. I hesitated, then nodded. "A letter. From my grandson." She glanced over her shoulder. "The one you said still had a soul?" I chuckled. "That's the one." She didn't ask to read it. She just passed me a towel to dry my hands and said, "Good. Kids don't write letters anymore. When they do, you pay attention." That night, I sat by the window and read Jacob's note again. This time aloud, just to the stillness. I didn't turn on my phone, but I kept his number. That much I could do. 3 days later, Heather looked up from the register and said, "You've got a visitor." I turned. A man stood just inside the cafe, squinting at the menu like it was written in code. Tall, early 80s, neatly dressed. It wasn't Jacob, but it was someone else I hadn't expected. "Can I help you?" I asked. He looked at me, startled, and then smiled. "You're the one who knows how to make real coffee," he said again. It was Walter, of course. But something in his tone was different that day. Softer, warmer. I try, I said. I poured his cup cream, 2 splashes, and handed it over. He drank slower than usual, said less, but lingered longer. I saw an old picture of my wife last night, he said. The one from our anniversary trip to Astoria. She was laughing at the gulls stealing French fries. He smiled, looking somewhere far past the cafe window. Funny how the smallest memories are the ones that last. I remember my grandson helping me build a birdhouse, I said. Painted it bright red and said it would be the coolest house in the whole yard. Walter nodded. Did it last? No, I said. It fell apart in the rain, but we laughed while building it. He sipped. That's the part worth remembering. And that evening, Ruth and I shelled peas at the kitchen table. Franklin the cat curled around my ankles like a furry anchor. Are you hiding or healing? She asked, not unkindly. I looked up from the colander. Both, she nodded. Fair. The next morning, I stood outside the post office with Jacob's letter in my pocket and a pen in my hand. I didn't write back. Not yet, but I bought stationery. That felt like a beginning. Istida. Then, on Friday afternoon, something unexpected happened. I turned on my phone. The screen blinked to life like it hadn't aged a day. Messages flooded in 32 missed calls, 18 voicemails, the oldest from Stephanie. Frantic. Breathless. Martha, we thought you were in the bathroom. Please call. We're boarding. We're sorry. Lies. All of it. Then Ryan's voice. Sharp. Clipped. Where are you, Mom? This isn't funny. Fine. Do what you want. I didn't respond, but I saved Jacob's number. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I tapped call. It rang twice. Then his voice. Tentative. Cracked. Grandma? I exhaled. I'm here, darling. A pause. Relief bloomed through the line. You're okay. I'm better than okay. Where are you? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I chose. He didn't beg. Didn't guilt. Just breathed. I'm glad you're safe. I miss you. I miss you too. That was enough. No explanations. No apologies. Just presence. And that mattered more than any plane ticket. Later that night, I sat with Ruth on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt, a steaming mug between us. You look lighter, she said. I made a call. Someone who deserved it? Yes. She nodded and didn't press. The sky had begun to turn dusky blue, and the air smelled faintly of rain and rosemary from Ruth's herb pots. I felt something in me exhale. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like someone running. I felt like someone returning not to a place but to myself. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of gray, damp morning Portland seems to specialize in where the light never fully arrives. And even the birds sound unsure. The breakfast rush had just ended. I was wiping down the counter, my back sore but satisfied, when Heather poked her head out of the back kitchen. You've got someone asking for you. I turned. A man in a suit stood just inside the cafe. Clean-shaven, hair too neat for Portland, sunglasses still hooked in his front pocket. He looked like he didn't belong. He waited until I stepped out from behind the counter before approaching. Mrs. Helen Whitmore? The tone was all wrong, too careful. The kind of voice you use when delivering news someone might throw a plate over. I am, I said. My name is Derek Sorensen. I represent Ryan and Stephanie Whitmore. They've asked me to speak with you regarding your well-being and your assets. I didn't blink. My well-being, I said, is excellent, and my assets are none of their concern. He shifted uncomfortably. They're very worried, Mrs. Whitmore. You left without notice. They were unaware of your whereabouts. They've even involved local authorities in case you were coerced. I folded my apron slowly and placed it on the counter. Tell Ryan and Stephanie, I said, my voice even, that I am not a pet they forgot to pick up. I am not under duress, I am not confused, and I am not coming home. He looked startled. If you would just consider. I've done enough considering. I walked past him, past Heather, out the front door and into the soft mist of late morning. I didn't look back. Walter was standing on the sidewalk, just a few paces from the door. His hands were tucked in the pockets of his gray windbreaker, and his eyes followed mine. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, because I wasn't going to let anyone convince me I wasn't. Oh, 30. That night, I sat at the tiny desk in my room with a pad of paper and a pen that still wrote smoother than expected. I didn't write to Ryan. Not this time. I wrote to Stephanie. Just 3 lines. "I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry, but I'm not coming back." I signed my name and sealed the envelope. Then I reached for another sheet, this one addressed to Mr. Derek Sorensen, Esquire. The words came quickly. "To whom it may concern, I, Helen Whitmore, am of sound mind, in a safe and voluntary living arrangement. I have retained local counsel. Any further attempt to contact me under the pretense of concern will be treated as harassment. Do not contact me again." Short, legal, final. The next morning, I mailed both letters. The woman at the post office didn't ask questions, just weighed the envelopes, stamped them, and handed me a receipt. It felt like dropping anchor, like setting a boundary in concrete. Back at the cafe, Heather didn't mention the man in the suit, but she handed me an extra apron. "Busy week ahead," she said. "You in?" "I'm in." Walter came in later than usual, his steps slower, the cane now a regular part of his rhythm. "You burn the place down yet?" he asked. "Not today." He sipped, then gave me a long look. "You ever think about calling them? Just once?" I wiped a spot on the counter that didn't need it. "Every day," I said. "And every day I don't." He didn't push, just nodded, respectful. That was the thing about Walter, he understood silence as an answer. When I got home, Ruth was on the porch. She was sipping wine from a coffee mug and sorting through the mail with a frown. "You got fans now?" she asked, holding up a thick manila envelope. "Return address, Wilmington." I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside, a 6-page letter from Ryan. The first line read, "I can't believe you did this." Not, "Are you safe?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just, blame. He accused me of embarrassing them, of creating a scene through absence, of abandoning the children, who were confused and heartbroken, on vacation. Not a word about the airport lounge. Not a word about asking me to wait. Just performance. Just fiction. The last line said, "We're willing to talk, but only if you're ready to be reasonable." Reasonable. As if decades of cooking, babysitting, and quietly being erased had been unreasonable. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Ruth didn't ask what it said. She just nodded toward the window. "Storm's coming." It was, but I wasn't afraid of storms anymore. After the letter, something in me went still. Not numb, not angry, just still. It was like standing in a room after someone slams the door, the silence that follows. Thick and honest. And in that silence, I finally asked myself a question I hadn't dared in years. Now that no one is looking, what do I want to do? The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made coffee, fed Franklin, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen that had lived in my purse since 1994. At first, I just doodled. Little birds, trees, a teacup with steam. Then, without planning to, I wrote a sentence. Millie the mole didn't like loud things. I stared at it, blinked, then wrote another. She especially didn't like thunder, or vacuums, or Aunt Ida's singing voice. I laughed out loud. To no one the way you do when something sneaks out of your bones and reminds you you're still in there. I used to want to write children's books. Back before Ryan. Before mortgage payments and school lunches and keeping peace at dinner, I even sent a few stories to publishers. Got polite rejections. Then Derek got sick, and everything else just paused, permanently, until now. By the end of the morning, Millie the Mole had 5 pages of timid adventure. I hadn't written that much for myself in decades. Ruth walked in, blinking at the smell of coffee and the early sun. "You're up," she said. I wrote a story. She poured herself a cup. "You gonna read it to me or just gloat silently?" I read it aloud. Halfway through, Ruth chuckled into her mug. "You're not half bad," she said. "I hate moles, but I like this one." End of ID. That night, Walter stayed longer than usual at the cafe. The booths had cleared. The clock ticked softly above the door. "Big plans this evening?" he asked, cradling his mug. "I started writing again," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Writing? Children's stories. Silly ones. About anxious animals." He smiled. "Sounds brave." "I think it's the opposite of brave. Maybe. But sometimes telling small truths is harder than shouting big ones." We didn't say much after that. But when he left, he tapped the counter with 2 fingers. "Don't stop," he said. Oh. Over the next week, a quiet rhythm returned. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons writing, evenings listening to Ruth complain about the city council or sharing crossword clues over toast. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Walter. Always Walter. A steady presence in the 9-10 hour, with bird facts and soft questions and stories that made me feel like I wasn't the only one still learning how to begin again. Jacob called once. I answered. He didn't say much, and neither did I. But there was warmth in the silence. A sense that something wasn't broken, just waiting. He told me he'd started a part-time job at a bookstore. "They don't yell," he said. "And they give me free coffee." I told him about Millie the mole. He asked if she was scared in the end. "No," I said. "But she's still cautious. She just sings louder now." Jacob didn't say anything for a second. Then, "I'm glad she has a voice." In Christ. At the library 2 blocks over, I checked out a children's book on self-publishing. Not because I was ready, but because I wanted to be. I read it slowly at night, curled up in bed with Franklin asleep on my ankle and Ruth snoring drifting in from the next room. The book talked about page count and illustration and ISBNs, but all I really cared about was this. "You don't need permission to begin again." I read that line twice, then underlined it, then whispered it like a prayer. Because sometimes, even after all these years, I still needed to hear that truth out loud. On Friday, Heather handed me my second paycheck in a thin white envelope. $78 and change. I took it to the same bank on 3rd. The teller Mari, with her lavender nail polish, smiled when she saw me. "Back again?" she asked. "Back and better," I said. I cashed it in 5s and 1s, walked to the used bookstore near the park, and bought myself a small journal with a painted robin on the cover. Millie the mole got her own notebook now. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that was everything. It came in a manila envelope, thick and stiff, with no return name, just a Wilmington postmark in the corner. Ruth slid it across the kitchen table with a grunt. "You got fans now?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stared at it a moment before opening it. I knew what it was before the flap even peeled back. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping front page of the community section. The headline read, "Missing Matriarch. Family seeks answers in grandmother's disappearance." There was a photo of me, one I didn't remember posing for, likely taken at some family gathering years ago. I was holding a pie dish and smiling that tight, camera-trained smile I'd worn for most of my life. I read the first line aloud. "We're deeply worried," said Ryan Whitmore, her only son. "She vanished without a word. We just want her safe." I didn't laugh right away. I read on. Stephanie had a quote, too. "She's vulnerable. We fear something happened. She's not the type to do something like this." That did it. I laughed loud and sudden. A sharp bark of disbelief that made Ruth raise an eyebrow. "Not the type," I repeated. "Apparently I've been reclassified." Ruth leaned over my shoulder, scanning the column. "You should sue them for underestimating you. They'll have to get in line." I folded the article carefully, not to keep it for sentiment, but as a kind of receipt. Proof that people only start worrying when they can't use you anymore. The entire piece was theater. No mention of the 8 hours in the lounge. No mention of the pink shirt or the ignored pages. Just grief, confusion, and concerned quotes from 2 people who wouldn't have looked twice if I'd vanished from the dinner table, much less the airport. Heather found the same article later that day. Someone had left it on the cafe counter with their coffee receipt. She brought it to me during the lull between breakfast and lunch. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. "Never better," I said. And it was the truth. Because there's something clarifying about being erased in public. You realize just how much of your story other people think they own. Walter read the article the next morning. I didn't hand it to him, he just gestured to it where I'd left it near the register. They really said missing matriarch? Front page, I said. He shook his head. Some people don't start mourning until they lose control. We sat quietly for a minute. Then he handed me a small paper bag. I saw this and thought of you, he said, not meeting my eyes. Inside was a hand-painted magnet shaped like a birdhouse. A silly, colorful thing, the kind you find at a craft fair booth or a church fundraiser. I remembered what you said about the red birdhouse. It's not much. I held it in both hands. It's perfect. I stuck it on the fridge that night right next to Ruth's grocery list and a postcard she'd never mailed. I didn't tell her about it. Some things you keep for yourself. Instead, I told her I'd be baking something for the community potluck after all. Lemon squares? She asked, already reaching for the flour. No, I said. Something better. The next morning, I pulled out my old recipe box, the one I hadn't opened in nearly 10 years. The note card smelled faintly of cinnamon and thyme. I found the one I was looking for, written in Derek's neat, left-slanted print. Helen's sweet potato cake, good enough to make people behave. I smiled. Then I baked. The house filled with nutmeg and memory. Ruth danced barefoot in the kitchen to a radio station stuck in the 70s. Franklin meowed like someone had promised him frosting. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone with history that didn't hurt to remember. The potluck was held in the basement of the old stone church on Stafford and Elm, the kind of place that always smells faintly of hymnals and lemon cleaner, no matter the day. Ruth and I arrived 10 minutes early, cakes carefully covered and cradled in her arms like holy offerings. I carried the utensils and napkins, and a nervous flutter in my chest I hadn't expected. It had been years since I walked into a room full of strangers, and didn't care what they thought of me. Go find us a table, Ruth said, adjusting her grip on the foil-covered tray. I'll do the schmoozing. I slipped into the back row of folding tables, near the coffee urn. The crowd trickled in older women in thick sweaters and soft shoes, men hovering by the buffet like it might vanish if they blinked. Laughter rose in little bursts. It wasn't elegant, but it was alive. A woman with a clipboard and a long gray braid orchestrated the flow like a general in an apron. She wore a t-shirt that said, "Blessed but tired" in bold navy letters. I liked her immediately. I was warming my hands around a styrofoam cup when someone tapped my shoulder. You the one who brought the sweet potato cake? The voice asked. I turned. The woman was sturdy, kind-eyed, with a sensible haircut and flour on her jeans. I did. Well, God bless you, she said. I thought Clara Porter was going to bring her Jell-O mold again. Yours smells like someone still remembers what holidays taste like. I laughed. I've been known to cook under pressure. She leaned in like we were old friends already. Don't tell Clara I said that. I won't if you don't. As the night went on, the basement filled with the easy chaos of too many people and not enough matching chairs. Dishes passed hand to hand. Conversations started and restarted. Someone brought out a guitar and played 3 slightly out-of-tune songs that somehow made everyone smile anyway. My cake disappeared before the prayer ended. Someone asked for the recipe. I told them it was classified. Midway through the evening, Ruth introduced me to 2 women from her knitting group. Marcia, a retired school librarian with cat-themed earrings, and Terry, a former bus driver who swore she'd never touch public transit again unless someone paid her double and gave her a seatbelt. We do trivia nights, Marcia said, pushing a bowl of something green in my direction. You should come. I'll only answer questions from before 1990, I warned. Deal, Terry said. Modern trivia's trash anyway. And later, while unstacking disposable cups with Ruth, I caught her watching me, a small, sideways glance over the top of her glasses. You look smug, she said. I feel smug. She grinned and bumped my shoulder with hers. Good. We didn't stay too long. Just enough to be noticed. Not enough to wear out the welcome. On the way home, the sky had darkened to that indigo that belongs only to spring evenings. The streets shimmered with leftover rain. When we got back, Ruth kicked off her shoes and flopped onto the couch like a teenager. Franklin jumped up immediately, grumpy and warm, claiming her lap like he paid rent. I stood in the kitchen, rinsing cake plates and humming something I didn't quite recognize, a tune that felt older than memory. "You know they're going to show up eventually," Ruth said without looking up. I didn't answer. She said it again, softer. "Sooner or later. Ryan, Stephanie, somebody." I know. And I did. The letter, the article, the man in the suit, they weren't just noise. They were warnings. The kind people send before a last attempt to pull you back. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hide. Let them come. I had a fridge full of leftovers, a magnet shaped like a birdhouse, and a name tag at the cafe with a coffee stain on it that looked suspiciously like a heart. I had my life. Not borrowed, not assigned. Mine. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. It was a quiet Tuesday. The kind of morning where even the air feels like it's waiting for something to happen. The cafe was slow. Just a few regulars, Walter with his crossword, a couple grading papers by the window, someone tapping on a laptop like it owed them an apology. I was behind the counter, folding napkins into neat triangles, when I felt it. That instinct, like being watched. Not dangerously, not even rudely, just deliberately. I looked up, and there she was. Stefania. She stood in line like any other customer. Hair pulled back in a tight bun, blouse too crisp for Portland, expression blank. She clutched her phone in one hand, a leather tote slung over her shoulder. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. I met her eyes calm, clear, and waited. She stepped up to the counter. "Coffee," she said. "Black." I poured it slowly. No words. No smile. Set it down gently between us. She reached for it, then paused. "I wasn't sure this was real," she said quietly. "That it was actually you." "It's me," I said. "I didn't think you'd be working in a place like this." "Most people don't think of me much at all," I replied. She looked around, like trying to take inventory of the world I'd built without her. "You left," she said, as if it were a crime. "I stayed," I corrected. "I stayed at that airport for 6 hours, holding a casserole and waiting for someone to realize I was missing." Her jaw tensed. "We thought—" "No," I said. "You didn't think. You decided." Stephanie sipped her coffee but didn't taste it. "You humiliated us." He blinked. "No, Stephanie. I disappeared. You humiliated yourselves by pretending you didn't notice." A beat of silence. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but structurally. Like the foundation she built herself on, control, presentation, image had started to crack. "I didn't ask to be your enemy," she said. "I'm not your enemy," I said. "I just stopped being your audience." She looked like she might cry, or shout, or both. But she didn't. Instead, she placed the cup down and reached into her tote. Pulled out an envelope. I didn't touch it. "What's that?" I asked. "Just information. About the house, your finances, things Ryan is trying to sort." I nodded. "Tell Ryan I'll handle it through my attorney. And tell him I hope he finds his conscience. It used to be quite lovely." "Oh, cries." Stephanie's face flushed. "This isn't who you are," she said. "No," I said softly. "This is who I was before I got tired of being erased." She stared at me for a moment. Not angry, just unsure. Then turned and walked out, her heels clicking too loud for the room. Walter didn't look up from his paper until she was gone. "You knew she was coming?" he asked. "No," I said. "But I saw her before she saw me." He smiled. "That's progress." That night, I walked home slower than usual. Not because I was tired, but because the world felt different, lighter. The confrontation hadn't shaken me. It had steadied me. Ruth was on the porch, reading a gardening catalog under the porch light. "She showed up?" she asked, without looking up. "Yes." "She cry?" "Number." "Shame." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the city hum. "She's afraid of you now," Ruth said finally. "That's why she came. Not to bring you home, but to make sure you weren't stronger without them." I didn't say anything, because it was true. And oddly enough, that truth didn't feel bitter. It felt earned. The envelope came on a Thursday. Just a regular white envelope, tucked between a grocery store flyer and Ruth's coupon booklet for arthritis cream. No special markings. No golden seals. Just my name, typed neatly on the front. H. Whitmore. I stared at it over my toast and jam. Ruth, across the table, squinted over her glasses. That from the IRS or a secret admirer? Hopefully neither, I said, though my heart was racing. I tore it open slowly. Inside, a single-page letter printed on cream-colored paper with a letterhead I vaguely remembered, Pineberry Press, Children's Imprint Division. I had mailed them Millie the Mole's manuscript nearly 5 weeks ago, mostly on a dare to myself. The letter read, Dear Miss Whitmore, thank you for submitting your manuscript, Millie the Mole and the Terrible Vacuum. We found your story both charming and emotionally resonant, especially Millie's quiet bravery. We are interested in discussing potential next steps. Would you be open to a call next week to explore the possibilities? It was signed simply, Amy M., Acquisitions Editor. I reread it 3 times, then once more, just to make sure the words didn't vanish. Ruth looked up from her coupons. Well, you get sued or discovered? I handed her the letter. She read it, then let out a long, dramatic whistle. Hot damn. You're about to be famous. Do I need to start screening your fan mail? I haven't even called her yet, I said. But you will. I nodded slowly. I think I will. Arlie. Walter was the next to know. He came in later than usual that day, and I couldn't stop smiling as I poured his coffee. You win the lottery or just good sleep? He asked. Neither, I said. I got a letter. I slid it across the counter. He read it quietly, lips moving slightly, eyes softening as he reached the end. He folded it carefully and handed it back. You know, he said, I had a feeling that Mole would find her way out. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. His smile said everything. That night, I called the number listed in the email below the letter. Amy sounded young, but warm, like someone who wore glasses too big for her face and drank tea by the gallon. I just loved Millie, she said. There's something about her she's scared, but still shows up. That's powerful for kids. And for 77-year-old women, I thought. She explained their process, how they worked with new authors, how small their team was, how they often published just 6 or 7 books a year. This wouldn't be fast, she warned. And we'd need to pair you with an illustrator. I'm not in a rush, I said. I just want to do it right. You already started doing it right, she said. You told the truth. That stuck with me long after the call ended. Because that's all Millie had done, told the truth about what scared her. And somehow, that had opened a door I thought was permanently closed. The next morning, I told Ruth I needed a folder. A fancy one, I said. For contracts or dreams. She drove us to the nearest office supply store and insisted on paying for the folder herself. It's your first publishing deal, she said. You need sparkle. Oh, it was teal with tiny gold stars. Very un-Helen. Very perfect. Oh, Ira. That weekend, we celebrated with cherry pie and sparkling apple cider. Walter joined us on the porch. He wore a blazer for the occasion. I haven't buttoned this thing since Carter was in office, he said. Ruth rolled her eyes but handed him a full plate. As the sun went down, I looked around at our mismatched trio, Ruth, with her loud opinions and silent kindness, Walter with his careful gestures and old secrets, and me, with my second chance in a folder full of stars. It wasn't the family I thought I'd grow old with, but it was the one I'd chosen, and that made all the difference. The children's librarian's name was Josie, and she wore mismatched earrings and rainbow sneakers. She greeted me with a hug that smelled like glue sticks and vanilla lotion. We usually don't do guest readers, unless it's Dr. Seuss week, she said. But Walter told me about your story, and honestly, I think we need more moles who are scared of loud noises. I stood at the front of the children's room, holding my manuscript in trembling hands. There were at least 20 children seated cross-legged on the rug. Some wiggled, some stared. One was chewing a sleeve like it owed him money. Behind them, a handful of parents leaned against the back wall. sipping library coffee and mouthing silent prayers that their kid wouldn't be the one to scream. I cleared my throat. Hi, I'm Helen, and I wrote a story about a little mole named Millie. A girl in a glittery hoodie raised her hand before I could begin. Is she magic? No, I said. Just brave. She nodded solemnly, as if that was better. I began to read. My voice shook at first. But somewhere around the second page, where Millie hides under her favorite leaf during a thunderstorm, something softened. The room leaned in. The wigglers stopped wiggling. Even the sleeve chewer paused. When I finished, there was a small beat of silence. Then applause, mostly from the adults. But the kids clapped too, loud and wild, like they understood something had happened, even if they didn't know what. Josie gave me a high five and a cookie shaped like a pencil. You're a hit, she said. When's the sequel? I smiled, still holding the manuscript against my chest like a shield. Then I saw him, standing at the edge of the stacks, near the audiobooks, Ryan. He didn't come closer, didn't wave, just stood there. I froze. But then he stepped aside and someone else came into view. Jacob, taller than I remembered, thinner, with a new scar on his chin and a navy hoodie too big for his frame. He wasn't looking at me. He was holding something, a cardboard box, medium-sized, sealed with brown tape. He handed it to Josie and whispered something. She nodded, glanced at me, then took the box to the librarian's desk and waved me over. This is for you, she said quietly. I opened it. Inside, dozens of small envelopes, each labeled in pencil. Dates, notes, tiny messages. On top was a letter. Grandma, I didn't know how to find you, but I remembered you liked stories. So I asked the library back home if I could send them here. They said yes. Every week since Thanksgiving, I've written one little story. They're not good, but they're real. I hope you're okay. Love, Jacob. My hands trembled. One envelope was labeled the 3rd of December. Inside was a story titled The Boy Who Forgot to Cry. Another, dated New Year's Eve, was simply called Quiet is Not the Same as Empty. Ruth found me on the library steps 20 minutes later. I was holding the box like a cradle, eyes red but calm. He wrote to me. I said, Of course he did. She replied. She didn't ask what the letters said, didn't ask what I'd do next. She just put her hand on mine and said, Let's take the long way home. And we did. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. It took me 3 days to open the first envelope again. I kept the box on the corner of my writing desk, beside the Robin notebook and the stack of rejection letters I no longer had reason to reread. Every time I reached for it, my hand paused just inches above. Not because I didn't want to read his words, but because I didn't trust myself to survive them. On the 4th day, I lit a candle, brewed chamomile tea, and sat with the quiet like it was a person I needed to face. I chose the envelope dated the 24th of December. The boy missed his grandmother the most on Christmas Eve, the story began. Not because she made the best pies, not because she told the best bedtime stories, but because she was the only one who remembered what it meant to wait for something and believe it would still come. I pressed the paper against my chest. There were more stories like that, some just a paragraph long, some scribbled with pencil smudges, like he'd written them in the dark or between shifts at work. One titled, Things I Should Have Said, was just a list. I saw the pink shirt. I heard Mom say she didn't need to call you. I watched Dad nod and didn't ask why. I didn't think it mattered until I knew it did. I'm sorry. I folded it slowly, like it might tear under the weight of what it meant. And then, I picked up a pen. Jacob. I didn't finish. I waited. At Gate 3 Ampere, Minneapolis, St. Paul Airport, wearing my cardigan, holding a casserole, watching the arrivals board flash flight numbers I didn't recognize. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had forgotten to text. Maybe the car broke down, or the baby was sick. But hours passed, and no one came. So I didn't vanish. I just stopped being visible to people who didn't want to see me. But you saw me, even after. And for that, I am more grateful than I can say. I found a little corner of the world that feels honest. It has lemon squares and crossword puzzles and a porch that creaks when you lean too hard on the left side. I have friends who call me Helen and not Mom or Grandma, or can you babysit this weekend? And I have stories. Mine. And now yours too. Keep writing, Jacob. Not because the world needs more writers, but because writing is how we forgive what we can't fix. With love, Grandma H. Ira Liebel. I mailed it the next morning in a pale blue envelope Ruth insisted was dignified but not depressing. Walter offered to walk it to the mailbox himself. Feels like it deserves ceremony, he said. We all stood on the curb like it was New Year's Eve. Ruth raised her coffee cup. To brave moles and braver grandsons. And just like that, it was sent. A thread pulled taut across the country, quiet but unbroken. It was a Thursday when Walter stayed past 10. The cafe had emptied. Ruth had taken Franklin for a walk, muttering something about cats needing fresh air, which Franklin clearly disagreed with. The sky outside had turned a soft, cloudy gray. The kind that made you want to light a candle and whisper instead of talk. Walter didn't move from his corner booth. He sipped his coffee slowly, eyes fixed not on the crossword but on the window, where rain tapped a steady rhythm on the glass. You're quiet today, I said, wiping down the counter. He nodded, thinking. Dangerous habit. He smiled faintly but didn't laugh. I poured him a warm refill without asking. He didn't thank me. He didn't need to. There's a silence that comes between old friends when something real is about to be said. Not loud, not sudden, just gently inevitable. Walter broke it first. Her name was Elaine. I stopped wiping. She died 7 years ago. He continued, eyes still on the rain. Pancreatic cancer. Quick and cruel. I came around the counter and sat across from him. We were married 43 years. She hated grapefruit. Thought Sudoku was invented by sadists. Called every dog Henry regardless of their real name. He smiled at that, then paused. We used to come to this cafe every Thursday. It was our nicer-than-diner tradition. She liked the lemon bars. Said they tasted like something her mother forgot to teach her. I listened. Because sometimes that's the kindest thing you can do. Walter sipped again. The last year was hard. I was angry. Not at her. Not even at God, though I tried. I was angry at time, at how it never slowed down for the parts worth keeping. He looked at me then, and his voice lowered. The day she passed, I was late to the hospital. I'd gone home to shower. They called while I was drying my hair. I missed her by 8 minutes. He breathed out slowly, like it still ached in his ribs. She died at 9:10 a.m. And suddenly, everything made sense. The watch he checked. The ritual. The constancy. You come here at 9:10 for her. He nodded. It's not penance, he said. It's presence. I figured, if I sit in the same spot, drink the same coffee, maybe she'll sit with me again, just once. End quote. I reached out and rested my hand on his. We sat like that for a moment. No need to fix anything, only to witness. After a while, I said, she sounds like the kind of woman I would have liked. She would have told you to stop working so hard and open a B&B by the coast, he said, smiling. I might just do that, I said. He chuckled. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something lift from his shoulders, not the grief, but the weight of keeping it hidden. When Ruth returned, she found us still sitting there, 2 cups of coffee, one silent understanding, and a table full of crumbs and memory. She tilted her head. Did I miss something? Just time, I said. He didn't knock, just stood on the porch like a boy who forgot how to come home. I saw him through the kitchen window, tall, tired, hands in his jacket pockets like they were holding him together. Ruth had gone to the grocery store. Walter was at a doctor's appointment. For once, the house was mine, and mine alone. I opened the door. Ryan looked older, grayer at the temples, wrinkles deeper around the eyes. He wasn't the boy I raised. He wasn't even the man I used to chase after, begging him to call more. He was someone else now. Hi, Mom, he said. Hi, Ryan. We stood there, neither moving. Then I stepped back, just enough to let him in. He didn't sit right away, just wandered the front room, eyes scanning the bookshelves. The knitted blanket, the vase with wildflowers Ruth insisted on refreshing each week. "This is nice," he said. "Not what I pictured." "What did you picture?" "I don't know," he admitted. "A motel room? A basement? Something. Lonely." I nodded. "I lived lonely for a while. I got tired of it." He finally sat, on the edge of the couch, like he wasn't sure if he'd earned the cushions. "I came because Jacob showed me your letter." "How?" I stayed standing. "He didn't ask permission," he added quickly. "He just handed it to me and said, 'You need to read this like a person, not like her son.'" "That boy is smarter than both of us," I said softly. Ryan nodded. "I kept rereading the line about visibility. How you didn't disappear, we just stopped seeing you." He looked up. "And I think you're right. I don't remember when it started. But at some point, I stopped seeing you as a person. You became the background, the safety net, the giver." I didn't answer. Not out of anger, but because it wasn't my turn to speak. "I thought I was being a good son," he continued. "Working hard, sending money, calling every other week. I thought that was enough." He paused. "But that wasn't the point, was it?" "No," I said. "The point was that you never asked what I needed, only what I could provide." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." The room held its breath. And then he did something I didn't expect. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. It was old, worn, the corners frayed. He handed it to me. "I found this in Dad's desk after he passed. It's yours, isn't it?" I opened it. Inside, pages of notes, recipes, story ideas, snippets of poems, quotes from books I loved, doodles of birdhouses. And on the last page, in my own handwriting, "I don't want to vanish quietly. I want to live loudly, even if no one claps." I closed the book. "I wrote that the year Jacob was born," I whispered. "I never knew you wrote. You never asked." We sat there, two people with blood between them, and years of silence. Then Ryan said, quietly, "Can I ask now?" I looked up. "Ask what?" "Ask for the real story, the one we never let you tell. Not the mother version, not the grandma version, just Helen, the woman who got left at an airport and still chose to live." I breathed in and out, then I nodded. And for the first time in years, I began to tell my story not as a plea, not as a defense, but as a truth. Not to be accepted, just to be heard. The package arrived in the early morning plain cardboard. No fanfare. But inside was the first printed copy of Millie the Mole and the Terrible Vacuum. The cover shimmered softly in the light. Millie stood with her tiny suitcase, leaf umbrella overhead, staring down a monstrous vacuum cleaner 3 times her size. The dedication page read simply, "For anyone who's ever been told they're too small, too old, or too late and chose to show up anyway." I ran my fingers over the binding, not out of disbelief, but reverence. That afternoon, I took the book to the children's story hour. Josie gave me the floor, as always. And I read Millie's words like, I'd lived them because I had. The room was full. Kids cross-legged on the rug, parents sipping lukewarm coffee, and in the back row, Ruth and Walter side by side. And next to them, quietly slipping in before I began, Jacob. When I finished, the room clapped. But Jacob didn't move. He just looked at me and smiled. Oh. Later that week, a letter came in the mail, handwritten, from Ryan. He didn't say much, just that he was reading more now, that he'd ordered 5 copies of Millie, that he'd started therapy not because something was broken, but because he wanted to learn how to listen better. And at the end, one simple line, "I didn't know you were this brave. I want to know more." I cried when I read that, not out of pain, but relief. Because sometimes, the most sacred moment isn't someone coming home with apologies, it's them saying, "Tell me your story. I'm ready now." End quote. It reminded me of a story from scripture, the one about the son who left home, messed everything up, and finally came back, unsure if he'd be welcomed. But his father didn't scold him, didn't ask for repayment. He ran to him, arms wide, full of grace. I used to think that story was about the son. Now, I think it's about the one who waits with the light on, who leaves the door unlocked just in case, who never stops hoping, and when the knock finally comes, doesn't say, "Where have you been?" but instead, "Come in. You're just in time. I may not get everything back. Not the Thanksgivings, not the phone calls I used to wait for, not even the casseroles that went cold on the stove. But I got this. This moment, this porch, this peace. And it's enough. If you're still with me, thank you. Maybe you've been the one left behind. Or maybe you're the one still figuring out how to come home. Either way, I hope this story reminds you. You're not too late. You're not too much. You're not invisible. You're seen. You're loved. And there's still time to forgive, to rebuild, to be heard, even if it starts with something as small as a letter, or a little mole who finally faced her fear. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, because stories travel farther when we carry them together. And if you'd like more stories like this, full of hope, healing, and second chances, please like this video and subscribe. We'll keep the light on for you. Always.